Hi everyone, how's it going? Today I'll be playing HB Engineering the Future. Now, within the country, I seem to be famous for playing HB. I don't know why. It's not something that I brought upon myself. Um, it seems like that way. Perhaps because I've been doing so well with it. And sure enough, at Nationals last weekend, there were 6 people who, after 3 rounds, were undefeated, had a 6-0 record. Of the 6 people, 5 of them were on CTM, and the last one was me on HB ETF. So maybe that's why people seem inspired. Also because HB ETF is right now probably the best deck uh, in the competitive scene that most resembles core set Netrunner. Good eyes, good money, and just core agendas normal way. So today I'll be shedding some light on the finer points of playing this jammy HB deck. But this is a pretty different deck. I've tweaked the deck for blood money, or rather I shouldn't say that I tweaked it. This is an experimental deck. Come on, it's Marcus Betty. There's Marcus Betty in this deck. Am I crazy? Am I insane? There's Fairchild. You've never seen Fairchild in this deck before. Maybe you have if you watch my SSCI stream, but I don't really like it, preferring Magnet. But now things have changed, and I'm using less Enduran Ice. Let's see how this works. Still, calls from Jammy HB remain unchanged, and I hope that through this video you can appreciate some of the finer points of playing Jammy HB as well. So, I'm up against Andromeda today, and Blood Money is legal, so be aware of that. My opponent's probably playing Temujin. I keep so opening hand because it's hedge fund, but I don't end up playing the hedge fund. Instead, with 2 advanced assembly lines, I decide to install 1 and then install the Fairchild 2 on HQ. Obviously, to defend against Account Siphon. I will not rest the Fairchild 2 if my opponent runs HQ, but I don't expect her to because, well, first turn Andy, you never run. So, I'm going to draw for ice here with Jackson, and sure enough, I don't draw any ice, even though there are 17 of them in my deck. So I'm forced to double draw with Jackson once more, and all I find is a stupid Turing. I really need another central ice to defend R&D, obviously. So I was very unhappy with the fact that all I got was a central Turing, which is not good against Criminal. But now, here comes the fun cute times. First, I reshuffle with Jackson here, always respect rumor mill. Then, I'll wait for my opponent. He targets security testing on R&D. He targets Temujin on R&D. Oh, wait. I'll rest my advanced assembly lines during my paid ability window before you use your second click. And I'm gonna install ice on R&D. Ha! So, for people who are saying that HB eats now that out, sure, it probably is, but there's still some counterplay. You can use advanced assembly lines to disrupt Temujin. And that's huge. The ability to disrupt Temujin on the turn is really good, and I really like it. So this is how you can actually improve your odds against opponents without changing your deck. You just need to know what the cards do and how to play them. Play them a different way. So I hope this is something you can learn, not just with advanced assembly lines, but with all cards in general. Now, it was very unfortunate that I didn't actually manage to show that off this game, because the ice ended up being a stupid Turing, which is only one to break with the passport that my opponent already installed. So my opponent's still getting great value off R&D. If that had been an Architect, a Wall Static or something, that Temujin would be stuck there forever. My opponent would be stuck on 5 credits for a long time. That would have been really awesome for me. So while the game continues to play out, I'm still thinking of my next move. I'm certainly tempted to play the hedge fund from my hand. That would be something that needs to be done in due course, but also I need to defend R&D. With the Temujin pointed on R&D, I can't simply let my opponent get virtually free runs on R&D, gaining 4 credits each time. So the Fairchild 2.0 goes on R&D, and here's where I do something really sneaky. I drop the food in Archives. 2 reasons. Firstly, I'm probably not going to score the food this game. Given that my opponent's going to be really rich and have the breakers, I don't think I can advance an agenda in a remote without her stealing it. More importantly, she has security testing installed and Temujin pointed on R&D, which means there's no Temujin on Archives. This means that she's incredibly unlikely to run Archives and access it. If she's running Archives, it's probably only for security testing money. So the food can stay there safely. Plus, there's only 1 face down in Archive. She's not going to spend a click checking it. And this is what makes the food pitch a lot better. I can always wait until the Jackson eventually shows up, and even then, I don't have to reshuffle the food in if I suspect she's not going to go for it. The net result of this is that R&D agenda density is reduced by just that bit more. Every percentage of win you can squeeze out is always good. So now I finally play a hedge fund, and we go for advanced assembly lines on HQ. I'm solidifying my centrals here. I'm kind of worried about account siphon, so I'm making sure that my opponent doesn't get into that. She attempts to run R&D, and boo! Ooh, Fairchild 2.0. That's really, really expensive to break with Passport being at the sweet spot of 3 strength. Just out of reach of Passport range makes it 5 credits to break. That's very, very annoying, even with an Temujin pointed on R&D. So this is how you can kind of neuter Temujin. Sure, my opponent can still run R&D every turn, but it's going to cost 6 credits. She's going to get 5 in return. It's going to still cost her 1 credit every run. It's still okay. I mean, it's not the worst, but at least she's not gaining money out of control. So here, I believe that's an upgrade to look like Christian on the HQ. So my opponent cannot simply blind siphon in with all her breakers. So this is actually an important play to make, especially in more glaciary style decks where the ice actually matters. You want to have upgrades on HQ against criminals so that you don't have to worry about account siphon. And now that I actually have a Turing, I can actually begin making a remote, because Turing is super annoying for criminals. Sure, they might have Temujin, but they still don't actually have a good answer to remote code gates, especially remote 5 strength code gates. So my opponent bumps into the Turing here and doesn't seem to really know what Jammy HB is all about. I put anything and everything in scoring remotes, so my opponent clicks through it and is going to be sorely disappointed when they see a team sponsorship. Pretty big mistake here. My opponent doesn't trash it. With 18 credits, you have to expect that surely you would want to trash a team sponsorship, but no, my opponent doesn't. So I'm very happy to see that team spawn lives on. It's still a lose-lose situation for my opponent. If she trashes it, I'm just going to jam a Jackson Howard inside server 6. Can she really afford to spend 3 clicks to check it again? I might just jam the Kronos project instead. Speaking of Kronos project, I just drew it. Probably not very good against criminal, but I have bigger things to worry about. My opponent installs a turning wheel and is going to start accumulating counters. Now that's something I can't counter, the counter gain. But dirty laundry on R&D, so this is actually a net gain of money. So that's a pretty good thing to do. Even past the Fairchild 2.0, and more importantly, getting a turning wheel counter or an agenda for her efforts. That's quite worth it. Notice that security testing is kind of turned off. My opponent has sec testing targeted on archives, but simply cannot afford to run it because it might be an architect. Gotta respect the architect or Ichi. So that's another good thing about playing Prickly Ice. Now passing over the turn to me, I draw into archive memories. Now, I'd like you to participate as per usual. What would you do in this situation? This is your hand. This is in archives. And given that HQ Ice is Architect and Fairchild 2.0 into Christian Grid, what would your next 3 clicks be here? Think about it. Pause the video if you need to, because I'm about to reveal the answer. Well, clearly you can see from your hand there's actually not much you can do. The best you can do, archive mem. At this point, I truly begin worrying about all the run-based synergy that my opponent is playing. There is sec testing, there is a Temujin, and there's a turning wheel, and now there's a data sucker. So what I do here is what most players wouldn't do. Most players will probably click for credits, maybe get a Baltic label with the archive mems, but what you really want to do is to juice the maximum you can out of your ETF credit, and what better way to do that than to fortify archives, which conveniently allows you to defend against the data sucker onslaught at the same time. You can bet that my opponent would be running archives with the sucker and the archive and sec testing pointer at archives. So installing the additional ice over archives is going to prove to be a deterrent. Another thing I'm doing right here is diverting my opponent's attention from archives to HQ. By using archive memories on Baltic label, I'm saying, hey, I have an agenda in hand that I'm going to score next turn, and I need the Baltic label to do it. When you're playing Jammy HB, you're trying to sell your opponent a story, and your job is to make the story as convincing as possible while completely bluffing. There are no agendas in hand. I really hope he runs my hand here and sees nothing, paying a ton of credits to do so. At this point, I truly begin worrying about all the run-based synergy that my opponent is playing. There is sec testing, there is a Temujin, and there's a turning wheel, and now there's a data sucker. So what I do here is what most players wouldn't do. Most players will probably click for credits, maybe get a Baltic label with the archive mems, but what you really want to do is to juice the maximum you can out of your ETF credit, and what better way to do that than to fortify archives, which conveniently allows you to defend against the data sucker onslaught at the same time. You can bet that my opponent would be running archives with the sucker and the archive and sec testing pointer at archives. So installing the additional eyes over archives is going to prove to be a deterrent. Another thing I'm doing right here is diverting my opponent's attention from archives to HQ. By using archive memories on Biotic Labor, I'm saying, hey, I have an agenda in hand that I'm going to score next turn, and I need the Biotic Labor to do it. When you're playing Jeremy HB, you're trying to sell your opponent a story, and your job is to make the story as convincing as possible while completely bluffing. There are no agendas in hand. I really hope he runs my hand here and sees nothing, paying a ton of credits to do so. In reality, I'm secretly hoping that I'm going to top deck the ABT, because then I can score it with Biotic Labor, and then trigger team sponsorship to install Jackson Howard, which will allow me to safely fire the ABT. Of course, my opponent didn't fall for my bait and probably went for the best possible server, R&D. I didn't want him to run R&D, her to run R&D here, because if there's an ABT on top of R&D, I'll be pretty sad. Well, she's still gonna get decent value out of this, liberating the last few credits of Temujin, but not seeing any agendas. So I kind of know that I'm not gonna get any agendas of... Oh, sorry, no, that was a security testing run, so she of course doesn't get any agendas, but now she's gonna see 2 cards, and guess what? The ABT that I wanted, they were both on top of R&D. Oh, that was a dagger through my heart. I really, really, really wanted those ABTs. Firing an ABT and getting a trigger off would be so sweet. But nope. Instead, all I get is a stinking hedge fund and another shift division. We don't need 2 shift divisions. I'm sorry. You can go home. We only need 1 of you. Anyway, I draw into a global food. Pretty useless agenda with Chronos Project scored already. Unfortunately, there's already 1 in the bin. Don't forget, I still have that sneaky global food in the bin. Haven't thrown it away yet. It was supposed to reduce R&D agenda density for the occasion when my opponent runs R&D, but clearly it didn't really help. The 2 ABTs just went into her score area, which wasn't nice. And guess what? That is a joke of an architect fire. My opponent couldn't find their sentry breaker for ages, but R&D is so flooded. Vitruvius. Now that looks like horrible, bad news bears at first glance, but when you think about it, it's actually not that bad. I actually do want to score agendas. I want to trigger my team sponsorship. So, I'm going to leave the Vitruvii there because I can score the next one with Biotic Labor. And I'm hoping my opponent doesn't run R&D. I don't think they will because they have no wheel counters and they don't have Temujin on R&D. So what I'm doing here is quite interesting. This is another one of my plays I'm making. I'm firing Architect to install advanced assembly lines. This gives me economy, and economy is actually pretty important here. I actually use both subroutines to install advanced assembly lines, both from R&D and from archives. So in essence, this is Architect basically read gain 4 credits as the core, which is really, really nice if you think about it, because even after spending 4 credits to res the Architect, 4 credits to res the Fairchild 2.0, and 3 credits to res the Christian Grid, I'm still in Biotic Labor range. I'm not all that rich, but by allowing me to fire the Architect, I suddenly have enough money to Biotic Labor next turn. And you bet that I will. Or will I? I actually don't know. We'll see. But in any case, that's another cool thing you can do with Architect if you have advanced lines in your deck. You can really make a lot of money very quickly with it. Yep, I'm going to score it because I'm really afraid of my opponent running my R&D again. So, we get a Vitruvius out of the way, and more importantly, we get a team spawn trigger. What do we trigger for this time? Tricky. Normally, I would go for advanced assembly lines, but in this case, since I won't get the ETF credit from installing the advanced assembly lines, I decided to use Team Sponsorship's ability. The fact that it's a free install, I'm gonna use it to install ICE, and I'm putting on an R&D. I'm not sure if the choice of server is correct. It could be R&D, could be HQ. I'm not very sure. But either way, I'm just gonna do it. And at the same time using advanced assembly lines here to install a new card in the server, mostly just to gain a credit. It's another copy of Team Sponsorship. I'm not gaining any ground here. But I'm hoping that, yeah, my opponent would be silly enough to run that server, because advanced assembly lines cannot install agendas. It can only install upgrades or assets or ICE. But it seems like my opponent isn't too aware of that, or really wants to get rid of the Jackson Howard. Either way, they are running my server, and I'm happy to make them pay 3 credits for the Peacock and 4 for the Turing. Totally worth it, all to see a team sponsorship once more. But here's the big thing. Here's the really big thing. My opponent made a mistake of trashing the team sponsorship. Wait, what? Didn't you say earlier that trashing team sponsorship is something you must do? Well, there's a big difference here. As you can tell, my opponent is now on very few credits. You didn't realize that? Temujin ran out. They're poor. And they opened a very big scoring window for me by trashing that team spawn. So, by blowing... so it's a mistake for my opponent to blow open a scoring window like this. It's very easy for me to just chuck the Vitruvius in the server right now, while my opponent slowly clicks for credits, installs the class, while I run away with the game, scoring the Vitruvius, putting me at match point. Meanwhile, I draw the third Vitruvius into my hand. Remember that Architect Fire? Well, the Agenda Flood is paying off. I'm getting all the agendas I need into my score area, and the last one's in my hand. Hopefully they won't run it. Now, I do rest the Fairchild 1.0 here. They think they can get away with a free sec testing run? I'm afraid they're wrong. Well, even though I was only on 1 credit, it's more than enough to res the Fairchild 1.0. That's a 2 credit tax for 3 credit return and a data cycle counter. Still kind of worth it for my opponent, but a lot less worth it than if, say, I were playing an Iceless deck, or an Ice-Light deck for that matter. So having a lot of chunky ice is actually proving to be really good against this Temujin deck. Now, I drew my win condition. I knew the Baltic label was coming up from the Architect, so I was very content to just sit back, click for credits every single turn. All I need to do now is to hold out for 2 more turns and I'll win the game with Baltic Vitruvius on 6 credits. And that's exactly why I was able to res the Fairchild 1.0 on Archive safely, because whether I res it or not, it doesn't affect the number of turns it takes for me to win the game with Baltic Label. Yep, so basically all I'm doing now is to just click for credits. But here comes something, an interesting juncture. Instead of just taking 3 credits, I jammed the food into the remote. 2 reasons. Firstly, it looks very suspicious if I just take 3 credits. My opponent would probably suspect something is in HQ. That's why I'm sitting pretty instead of trying to advance my board state. Secondly, why not take advantage of ETF credit? Same reason. And finally, one very important reason is that if I can divert my opponent's attention once again, it's all about the diversion. If I can force them to run my remote, that's time they're not spending on my HQ, which means I can guarantee the Baltic score. Now, the R&D run just now that you just saw was very, very dangerous. If my opponent had actually seen an agenda there, going up to 6 points, and then decided to run my remote, I would be in a very tough place, right? But now she's going for it again. If she finds an agenda on this R&D run and runs my remote, I'll be forced to rest the Ultimos Turing, which means I can't score the Vitruvius next turn. But thankfully, even though she's seeing 2 cards with the turning wheel, she's not getting an agenda. So if she runs my remote here, I'm happy to let her have the food. It doesn't win her the game. Another reason why I was content to toss the food in there to let her have it. Of course, she didn't do it, so I just take out the agenda for the win. But you can see the creative lines of play that I took that got me here. Now, I'm probably the last person you expect to hear this from, but I'll say this. Good play in the game is still very important to doing well in Netrunner. I'm saying this because I hear this a lot. I hear this sentiment being expressed that deck tech is everything. That you need all the tech to beat CTM and blah blah blah. Well, it's kind of true in the sense that never in the history of Netrunner has deck tech been more important. It still must be said that you need good plays in order to perform very well on stage. It's not like you can net deck say a tournament list, like a tournament first place list, and expect to do very well with it. You still need to know how to play the deck. You need to know why each card is in there and how they function and how you can best abuse them during your game. If you look at the results of the UK Nationals, the top 8 the top 8 players, most of them are household names. Players that have been doing very consistently well during this tournament season. There's a reason for that. It's no coincidence. Good players play well, win games. I hope through this video I've convinced you that there are lots of plays you can make. Subtle plays that can up your win rate by that little percentage to edge your opponent. Thanks for watching. Happy night running. Goodbye.